you can manage chaos as long as you're not chaotic. Chaos cannot manage chaos.
Hello and welcome to Change and the Market, your mindful guide to the ever-changing real estate world. My name is Peyton Beck. I'm here at Masiello HQ, and joined with me, as always, is our noted industry trendsetter, two-time best-selling author and CEO, Chris Masiello. Chris, how are you today?
Hi, Peyton. Good to be with you. Good to be with our community.
Yeah, so we have a lot to cover today, but I think because of that, we kind of wanted to start off with some kind of sense-making, talking over some of those other things before we dive into too much. I think we just dive right in. Do you want to go for it?
We've talked about this, I think, before. A lot of times, like in our episodes, we'll talk about economic data and things like that, which, can be some combination of boring and overwhelming. However, we're in this real period of change. And so I think our job, right, you and I, and then the people who are watching, I think, part of what we're doing here is helping everybody make sense of things. So I take in data so it can kind of make sense for me. And then how do we alchemize that so that we can pass it through to everybody so it kind of makes sense to them, right, through a filtering process. So, I just want to kind of reiterate, the purpose, if we kind of geek out on some numbers and things, it's because we're trying to give everybody a sense of where things are, because I'm a real firm believer in how do you know where you're going if you don't know where you've been? And so the environment is, it's pretty fast paced, changing, all new trends. There's not one trend right now that's repeating itself. That's a repeat from another market. And even on an economic cycle. So I just want to get that out there and just kind of reiterate that for everybody.
I personally would say I feel like I have been overwhelmed by data in the last year. Just with everything going on. But keeping up to date is so important, especially in the real estate industry and even personal wealth management. So no, I think that's very, very important to keep in mind. But what do we want to dive into with regards to the market right now?
Well, I think one of the things I wanted to get into is pricing. The housing market is still buoyant in pricing. It's still positive equity. We're still getting appreciation. It's different by region. However, what I want to kind of surface for everybody is, appreciation rates are generally about 5% a year right now, right? So if it's a $400,000 house, it's going up at a rate of, $20,000 a year-ish. That said, though, the impact that interest rates have had is that it's kind of dampened a little bit the ability for buyers, for instance, to pay significantly over asking unless it's a lot of cash. I'll talk about the cash piece in just a second. And so kind of what I want to put out to everybody is if the house is, if your agent, and we could be anywhere in the country, right? If your agent is saying, well, your house is worth $400,000, you're going to want to stick pretty close to that number. Like a 400 isn't a 450, right? And you always have to align your pricing with your timing. So maybe a 400 could be a 415 or a 420 if you're willing to kind of wait a little bit. But if you're not willing to wait, that 400 might have to be a 399. And then if there's, competition in the market that will move the price up, we'll let that happen naturally. But don't you price it into the market, okay? And so I think we've got to be a lot more tighter on our pricing and understanding that that's not all of the margin or all of the premium, but just some of the premium in the market has dampened a little bit. It's not negative in any way. It's just understanding how the market shifts.
And Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, but does that boil down to just the idea that that small change of maybe $20,000 over or whatever else is reflected in that monthly cost with such higher interest rates that people just can't swing that?
Exactly. Yeah. It's a little bit like financial gravity. It just means that the payments are just a little bit heavier. That said, half of all of our sales are cash. Nationally, okay, a large number, I think it's a little bit under 50%, nationally, are cash, because there's this wealth effect that's happening now where, and we've talked about this before, there's this wealth effect where, I grew up, my grandparents, right, were products of the Depression. And so there was this thinking, with their wealth, they kind of held on to it until they left here, right? Until they passed. But that has burned off now, right? And so with, changing trust laws and perspectives around things, that families now are passing wealth down generationally while the older generations are, parents, grandparents, while they're still around, so everybody can enjoy it. And so that's why there's so much cash in the market. I was talking to one of our agents yesterday, and she was looking at her sales board. She said, yeah, like half of my sales are cash.
So I have always had this preconceived notion that whenever I hear this, like all these cash sales, my assumption was they were always like investors for businesses or whatever else.
No.
And that's not the case?
No. And that's a really good question, Peyton. That's a really good observation. No, investor sales in the residential market might be like 1 or 2%.
Really?
Yeah.
I think maybe I'm angled towards that. The last house I sold actually was towards an investor, and it was all cash. Yeah. So I think in my head I'm like, oh, that makes sense. It's a business with all this money, and
Yeah, I think that's a natural assumption. I think that's a perfectly good assumption, and I think a lot of people probably look at it that way. But no, there's just a lot of generational wealth. I mean, this is the wealthiest the country's ever been, as the baby boomers, like the post Second World War wealth effect for the country. And so this is the wealthiest it's ever been. And people have gotten a little more savvy about estate planning and passing their wealth along where that they can watch their families enjoy it. It's a pretty cool thing.
That's super interesting. We'll have I don't know if that's this episode, but at some point, I want to talk about the changes in kind of the trust laws and everything else, because I'm personally, that's a huge part of my plan for the future, and I like it. So
yeah, let's do it. That'd be fun.
So I think there was one other thing wealth-wise we kind of wanted to touch base on, right? And that was kind of the geography of wealth today.
Yeah. So there's two, and I think this kind of backs into pricing a little bit depending on where you are in the country. There's kind of two wealth elements to this market that we're in right now. And I'm talking both nationally, right? It affects all of us, though, no matter where we are. One is the wealth effect, the generational wealth effect, how that's trickling down and allowing more cash or mostly cash transactions, right? Then the other one is geography. So the post-pandemic, there's a post-pandemic wealth shift from people moving around, and so kind of the states or the regions that had a plus 10% increase in their population and along with it their wealth is northern New England, upper New York state, Texas, Florida, makes sense, right? The states that didn't do as well, or the regions that didn't do as well, was the West Coast and the Midwest. So I think pricing also is going to depend on where you are geographically, because there are some areas post-pandemic or through the pandemic that were more enriched than others. And some of that has to do with, of course, why people would pick different regions, quality of life, location to family, tax law, things like that. So there are a lot of factors. It doesn't mean any part of the country is any better or worse than the other. It's just that some of them just did better, for various reasons, through the pandemic. So pretty interesting. So if you're in New England, you might have a little more hedge in your pricing. If you're in Florida, you might have a little more hedge. If you're Southern Cal, maybe not. Your local agent would know that, but I think it's just something to be aware of, that there was a wealth shift through the pandemic.
Do we expect that wealth shift to maintain? Like, or do you, and I know that's kind of a hard thing to guess, right? Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
And that kind of makes sense, right?
It makes sense.
So if I'm living here in, let's say, St. Louis, could we imagine? I'm probably not I shouldn't hold my breath for that to shift anytime soon towards.
Well, one region I left out was kind of like the, UP in Michigan, Wisconsin, that whole general area. So I don't know how far away you are from that Chicago area, but yeah, I mean, that was one area that I'm sorry, I did leave that out, that actually did really well.
Again, kind of going back to the sense making, all that good jazz. I think I say that phrase a lot in this show, so I apologize. What should we take away personally with regards to getting so much information and ironing all that out?
Well, one of the things that has kind of dropped into me lately is about building in more consistency in our routines. I think when we go through periods of change, changes how we get from one place to the other. So it's not like we can avoid it. The question is like, how do we manage it? And one of the things, frankly, I started doing was time blocking. Like I very specifically said, okay, I'm going to block out time to do this, time to do that. It could be writing. It could be, of course, work appointments. That's a form of time blocking. But it also could be, free time for me to be, just working on things, either doing work for like our show or, doing research or things like that. And things like monthly with your spouse, your partner, setting up, a time block for an hour or so to go over your personal wealth strategy, a time block to like spending purposeful time on things that matter, your self-care rituals, yoga, walking, whatever the case may be, make an appointment for yourself. I think right now, there might be times where maybe it wasn't as important, but it feels to me like it's pretty important right now, just because there's so much fluidity. And when there's fluidity, there can be a little bit of chaos, but you can manage chaos as long as you're not chaotic. If you're not chaotic, then you can just manage it. But if you're chaotic in the environment
that says that, I said I need a T-shirt that says that, because that's legit.
Chaos cannot manage chaos. And so anyway, I think that was one of the things that kind of dropped in this week was, let's find a way to be more consistent with your routines and making appointments, time blocking, being purposeful about it. I think can really help. I know it's been helping me.
Yeah, I love that. And might I recommend to everybody watching, a really good time block would be maybe, every Friday, take about 20 minutes, 10 to 20 minutes, maybe watch this show. That would be great, which is a great segment.
It's a perfect time block.
I know, right? But that is going to do it for this episode of Change and the Market. If you've liked this show and you've set up your time block and you've enjoyed it, feel free to follow us on social media. That's Chris Masiello or Better Homes and Gardens, the Masiello Group, on basically all major platforms. And until next week, we hope you have a wonderful weekend, and we'll talk to you later.
Thanks, Peyton.
I know the recording's basically over. Let's just say hi to Brian really quick. Hey, Brian.
Hey, Brian. How's it going?
But yeah, no, that's all I got for you, man.